When I handed my mom that check for $12,000, I thought I was finally doing something right. I thought I was being the daughter she always wanted. But 1 week later, she knocked on my apartment door with tears in her eyes and said 5 words that changed everything. Sell your car. Rachel needs cash. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my family means understanding why I thought paying off mom's debt was gonna fix everything. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a software engineer in Portland, Oregon, making decent money for the first time in my life. But growing up, money was always the elephant in the room in our house. Not because we talked about it, but because we never did. Mom, Patricia Chen, had this way of handling financial stress that involved a lot of sighing, a lot of shuffling papers around the kitchen table, and absolutely zero communication about what was actually going on. Dad left when I was 14, and from that point forward, every conversation in our house seemed to dance around the topic of bills, debt, and how we were going to make ends meet. My younger brother Jake was always Mom's golden child. 3 years younger than me, he had this charm that could get him out of any situation. While I was studying my way through community college and working nights at a diner to pay for it, Jake was dropping out of his second attempt at university to find himself through a series of failed business ventures and expensive hobbies. But here's the thing about family dynamics that I didn't understand until much later. When you grow up in a house where love feels conditional on your ability to solve problems, you become addicted to being the problem solver. Every crisis becomes an opportunity to prove your worth. The first time I bailed Jake out of a financial mess, I was 22 and had just landed my first real job as a junior developer. He'd gotten himself into some trouble with credit card debt, about $3,000 that he'd racked up trying to launch a food truck business that never actually got off the ground. Mom called me crying, explaining how Jake was getting threatening calls from debt collectors and how she didn't know what to do. I remember sitting in my tiny studio apartment looking at my savings account balance. $3,000 was everything I had managed to save up for an emergency fund. But Jake's debt collectors were calling the house, Mom was losing sleep, and I had the power to make it all go away with a simple bank transfer. So I did it. I paid off Jake's credit cards, and for a brief moment, I was the hero of the family. Mom hugged me so tight that day, telling me what a wonderful daughter I was, how responsible and caring I'd grown up to be. Jake promised he'd pay me back as soon as he got on his feet, which we both knew wasn't going to happen, but the promise felt good anyway. That was the first time, but it wasn't the last. Over the next 6 years, the pattern became as predictable as the Oregon rain. Jake would get himself into some kind of financial trouble, a failed attempt at day trading, a business partner who screwed him over, medical bills from a motorcycle accident that could have been avoided if he'd been wearing proper gear. And every time, Mom would call me with that same desperate tone in her voice, explaining how Jake was really trying this time, how he just needed one more chance to get his life together. The amounts got bigger each time. $500 became $1,000, $1,000 became $3,000. By the time I was 27, I'd given Jake more than $15,000 in loans that we all knew were actually gifts. But I kept telling myself it was temporary, that eventually Jake would mature and start handling his own problems. Meanwhile, I was living like a monk. While my coworkers were buying houses and taking vacations, I was driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic and living in the same cramped apartment I'd rented straight out of college. Every bonus, every raise, every tax refund went into my savings account because I knew that sooner or later my phone would ring with another family emergency. But the call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at work debugging a particularly frustrating piece of code when my phone buzzed with Mom's ringtone. Usually she called in the evenings, so a mid-morning call immediately put me on alert. "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about something." Her voice had that shaky quality that I'd learned to associate with financial catastrophe. "What's wrong, Mom?"
It's not Jake this time. It's me. That was new. In all the years of family financial drama, Mom had never been the one in trouble. She was always just the messenger, the worried mother caught in the middle between her irresponsible son and her reliable daughter. "I've gotten myself into some debt," she continued, and I could hear her rustling papers. "Credit card debt. It's gotten out of hand, and I don't know how it happened so fast." She explained that over the past 2 years, she'd been using credit cards to cover basic expenses whenever money got tight. A grocery bill here, a utility payment there, car repairs, medical copays that her insurance didn't cover. Each individual expense seemed reasonable at the time, but the interest had been compounding, minimum payments had been missed, and late fees had been piling up. "How much are we talking about, Mom?"
The silence stretched long enough that I started to worry the call had dropped. $12,000. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the number was so much larger than I'd expected. $12,000 was more than I'd ever paid for Jake at one time. It was a significant chunk of the money I'd been saving for a down payment on a house, a goal I'd been working toward for 3 years. Sarah? Are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. I'm just processing. She launched into explanations about how she'd been trying to handle it on her own, how embarrassed she was to ask for help, how she'd been lying awake at night worrying about it for months. The minimum payments were eating up nearly a quarter of her monthly Social Security income, and she was falling further behind every month. "I know you've already done so much for Jake," she said, "and I hate to ask this of you, but I don't have anyone else to turn to." That phrase, "I don't have anyone else to turn to," was like a key that unlocked every protective instinct I'd developed over the years. It was the same phrase she'd used when Dad left, the same phrase she'd used during every one of Jake's crises. I was the reliable one, the problem solver, the daughter who could be counted on to sacrifice her own needs for the good of the family. "Let me look at my finances and get back to you," I told her. But I already knew what I was going to do. I'd been saving money for a house, but what was the point of having my own place if my mom was drowning in debt? I'd been telling myself for years that family comes first, and here was an opportunity to prove it in the most concrete way possible. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at my savings account balance. $23,000. It had taken me 3 years to save that much, living on rice and beans, driving a car that was older than some of my coworkers, wearing the same clothes I'd bought in college. But I had it, and Mom needed $12,000 of it. The rational part of my brain tried to raise objections. What if I had my own emergency? What if I lost my job? What if something happened to my car and I needed money for repairs? But those concerns felt selfish compared to the image of Mom lying awake at night, worrying about debt collectors and compound interest. I called her back that same evening. "Mom, I can help you with the debt." The relief in her voice was immediate and overwhelming. She started crying, thanking me over and over, promising that she'd be more careful with money going forward, that this would never happen again. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow," I told her. "Just send me the account information for the credit card companies." 2 days later, I drove to Mom's house with a cashier's check for $12,000. She was waiting for me in her living room, surrounded by credit card statements and payment stubs, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. When I handed her the check, she started crying again. She hugged me and told me I was saving her life, that she didn't know what she would have done without me. For those few minutes, sitting in her living room while she called the credit card companies to make final payments, I felt like I'd finally done something that mattered. I'd solved the problem. I'd been the daughter she needed me to be. The credit card representatives were efficient and professional. Within an hour, Mom's debts were cleared, her accounts were closed, and for the first time in 2 years, she was free from the weight of compound interest and minimum payments. "I can't believe it's really over," she said, staring at the confirmation number she'd written down. "I feel like I can breathe again." I stayed for dinner that night, and it was one of the most peaceful evenings we'd had as a family in years. No underlying tension about money, no hushed phone conversations about Jake's latest crisis, no anxious shuffling of bills on the kitchen counter. Just Mom and I eating her famous lasagna and talking about normal things, like her garden and my work projects. When I left that night, I felt genuinely good about what I'd done. Yes, it had cost me $12,000 and set back my house-buying plans by at least a year, but I'd solved a real problem for someone I loved, and that felt worth the sacrifice. I should have known it wouldn't last. 7 days. That's how long the peace lasted. I was making coffee in my apartment kitchen when I heard the knock. Not the doorbell, an actual knock, the kind that sounds urgent and a little desperate. It was 8:30 on a Saturday morning, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Through the peehole, I could see Mom standing in the hallway, and even through the distorted fisheye view, I could tell she'd been crying. She was wearing the same blue cardigan she always wore when she was stressed, and her hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked as I opened the door. She stepped inside without being invited, which was unusual for her. Mom was always polite about boundaries, always waited to be asked in. But that morning, she walked straight to my couch and sat down heavily, like her legs couldn't support her anymore. I need to talk to you about Jake, she said. My stomach dropped. After 6 years of Jake-related financial crises, I'd developed a Pavlovian response to that phrase. But this felt different, more urgent, more desperate. What did he do now? He borrowed money from the wrong people, Sarah. Real money. From people who don't just send you to collections when you can't pay them back. She explained that Jake had gotten involved with some kind of cryptocurrency investment scheme through a guy he'd met at a bar. The details were fuzzy. Mom didn't really understand cryptocurrency any more than Jake did, but the bottom line was clear enough. Jake had borrowed $8,000 from someone named Marcus, promising to double it within a month through some kind of trading algorithm. Of course, the whole thing was a scam, Mom continued. There was no algorithm, no trading, no doubling of money. Jake lost everything, and now Marcus wants his $8,000 back plus interest. How much interest? $4,000. I sat down across from Mom, trying to process what she was telling me. So, Jake owes $12,000 to some loan shark? They're not loan sharks, Mom said quickly, as if the terminology mattered. Marcus runs a legitimate business. He just has different methods of debt collection. The way she said different methods made my skin crawl. Mom, what exactly has this Marcus guy said to Jake? She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring the way she always did when she was nervous. He's given Jake 2 weeks to come up with the money. All of it. If he doesn't what? Marcus has Jake's address. He knows where he works. He knows Jake's schedule, his routines. He made that very clear during their last conversation. I felt that familiar surge of anger that came whenever Jake's poor decisions created problems for other people, but underneath the anger was something else. Genuine fear. This wasn't credit card debt or student loans. This was the kind of debt that could result in Jake getting hurt, or worse. Where is Jake now? He's staying at my house. He's too scared to go back to his apartment. And what does Jake think he's going to do about this? Mom's face crumpled and fresh tears started flowing. He wants me to ask you for the money. There it was, the real reason for the 8:30 a.m. visit, the desperate knock, the blue cardigan. Jake was hiding at Mom's house, scared of the consequences of his own stupidity, and somehow that had become my problem to solve. Mom, I just gave you $12,000 a week ago. My entire savings account is practically empty. I know, honey. I know how much you've already sacrificed for this family. But Jake is talking about running away, maybe leaving the state. He's terrified, Sarah. I've never seen him like this. Maybe being terrified is exactly what Jake needs right now. Maybe if he finally faces some real consequences for his actions, he'll start making better decisions. Mom looked at me like I'd suggested we abandon Jake on a mountaintop. Sarah, these aren't normal consequences. We're talking about dangerous people here. What if they really hurt him?
Then maybe Jake should have thought about that before he borrowed money from dangerous people. How can you be so cold about your own brother? That question hit me like a slap. Cold? I've given Jake more money over the years than most people see in a lifetime. I've sacrificed vacations, delayed major purchases, lived below my means for years, all so I could be ready for his next crisis. And now I was being called cold for suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Jake should face the consequences of his own actions.
I'm not being cold, Mom. I'm being realistic. Even if I had $12,000 just lying around, which I don't, what happens the next time Jake makes a stupid financial decision? Because there will be a next time. There's always a next time with Jake. This is different. No, it's not different. It's the same pattern it's always been. Jake makes a reckless decision, gets in over his head, and then expects me to bail him out. The only thing that's different this time is the stakes. Mom was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up at me again, her eyes were red and puffy, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like calculation. What if you sold your car? The question caught me so off guard that I actually laughed. What? Your car. It's worth at least $10,000, right? Maybe more. You could sell it and take the bus to work for a while, just until we figure something else out. I stared at my mother, this woman who had raised me to believe that family always comes first, who had taught me that sacrifice was the highest form of love. And in that moment, I realized that she wasn't asking me to help Jake. She was demanding it. Mom, that car is how I get to work, how I buy groceries. How can I have any kind of independence at all? It's just temporary. Once Jake gets back on his feet, he can help you buy another car, a better one even. Jake has never gotten back on his feet. In 6 years, Jake has never once paid me back for anything, not even partially. He's your brother, Sarah. There it was again, the trump card that had been played in our family for as long as I can remember. He's your brother, he's family, blood is thicker than water. All the phrases that were supposed to make me forget that Jake was a grown man who consistently made choices that hurt the people who loved him. I know he's my brother, Mom, but that doesn't mean I have to bankrupt myself every time he screws up. Bankrupt yourself? Sarah, you make good money. You'll bounce back from this. Will I? Because it feels like every time I start to bounce back, Jake needs something else. I haven't taken a real vacation in 4 years. I'm driving a car that's older than some of my coworkers. I'm living in the same tiny apartment I rented when I was 22 because every time I save enough money to upgrade my life, Jake needs a bailout. Mom stood up from the couch, and for a moment, I thought the conversation was over. I thought she was going to leave, and we'd all figure out some other solution to Jake's latest crisis. Maybe Jake would finally grow up. Maybe he'd get a second job, or ask his friends for help, or find some way to solve his own problems for once. Instead, Mom sat back down and pulled out her phone. What are you doing? I'm calling Jake. I'm going to tell him that you won't help.
Mom, don't make this about me not helping. This is about Jake making better choices. She was already dialing. I could hear the phone ringing through the speaker. Jake, it's Mom. I'm at Sarah's apartment. A pause. No, honey. She says she won't sell her car to help you. I couldn't hear Jake's side of the conversation, but I could see Mom's face getting more upset as he talked. I know, sweetheart. I know you're scared. Another pause. Maybe you should start looking at bus schedules to other cities. She hung up and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was disappointing, but deeper than that. It was like she was seeing me as a completely different person than she'd thought I was. He's packing a bag right now, she said. He's going to disappear rather than ask his friends or coworkers for help because he's too ashamed. But he's not too ashamed to run away and leave his family wondering if he's dead or alive. Mom, Jake is manipulating you. He's manipulating both of us. Is he? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my son is in real danger and my daughter is more worried about keeping her car than keeping him safe. The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. I wanted to argue, to explain all the reasons why selling my car was unreasonable and unfair. I wanted to point out the pattern of manipulation and enabling that had been going on in our family for years. I wanted her to understand that helping Jake financially wasn't actually helping him at all. But looking at my mother's face, seeing the genuine fear and disappointment there, I realized that none of my logical arguments mattered. In her mind, this was a simple equation. I had something Jake needed, and I was choosing not to give it to him. "If something happens to Jake," she said quietly, "I'll never forgive myself, and I'll never forgive you either." Then she stood up, walked to my door, and left without saying goodbye. After Mom left, I sat on my couch staring at the door she'd just walked through, replaying every word of our conversation. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating, broken only by the hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for Mom to call back and apologize, or for Jake to call and tell me he'd figured out another solution. But as the minutes turned into hours, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on my kitchen wall. By noon, I couldn't take the isolation anymore. I called my best friend Emma, someone I'd known since college, who'd watched this family drama unfold over the years with increasing frustration. "Let me get this straight. Your mom wants you to sell your car because Jake borrowed money from some sketchy guy for a cryptocurrency scam?" That's the simplified version, but yeah. And she's making you feel guilty about not wanting to give up your only means of transportation? She's not making me feel guilty. I am feeling guilty. Emma was quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. Emma had opinions about my family dynamics, opinions she'd mostly kept to herself over the years because she knew how defensive I got when people criticized Mom or Jake. "Sarah, can I ask you something? When was the last time you did something for yourself? Something that you wanted, not something that solved someone else's problem?" The question caught me off guard because I couldn't immediately think of an answer. When was the last time I'd made a decision based purely on what I wanted rather than what my family needed? "I bought those new running shoes last month," I offered weakly. "You bought running shoes because your old ones had holes in them and you needed them for exercise. That's not doing something for yourself. That's basic maintenance." She had a point. I tried to think of the last time I'd made a purely selfish choice, a vacation I'd taken just because I wanted to go somewhere, a purchase I'd made just because it brought me joy, an evening I'd spent doing something purely for my own entertainment without worrying about whether I was being responsible with my time and money. "I can't think of anything," I admitted. That's what I was afraid of. "Sarah, you've been living your entire adult life like you're on standby for other people's emergencies. When do you get to just be a person instead of a solution to everyone else's problems?" I wanted to argue with her, to defend my choices and explain why family loyalty was important. But sitting in my sparse apartment, looking at furniture I'd owned since college because I'd never had enough savings left over to upgrade, Emma's words hit uncomfortably close to the truth.
But what if something really happens to Jake? What if something happens to you? What if you get sick and need money for medical bills? What if you lose your job? What if your car breaks down and you can't get to work? You've spent all these years making sure everyone else has a safety net, but what's your safety net? I didn't have a good answer for that either. After I hung up with Emma, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I opened my laptop and started browsing real estate listings. Not seriously, just to see what I could have afforded if I hadn't paid off Mom's debt the week before.
There was a small 2-bedroom house about 15 minutes from my office, with a garden and a garage and actual space to breathe. The mortgage payment would have been less than what I was paying in rent, and I could have afforded the down payment with the money I'd had in savings before Mom's crisis. I was scrolling through photos of the kitchen when my phone finally rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and my stomach immediately clenched with anxiety. "Sarah?" His voice was shaky, different from his usual cocky tone. "Mom told me about your conversation this morning." "Jake, No, let me talk first. I know you think I'm just some screw-up who keeps asking for handouts, and maybe that's true. Maybe I have been irresponsible with money, but this isn't like the other times." "How is it different?" "Because this time, if I can't pay, I might actually get hurt, like physically hurt. This isn't credit card companies or student loan servicers. This is Marcus, and he's not a patient guy." I could hear genuine fear in Jake's voice, something I'd never heard before. In all his previous financial crises, there had always been an underlying assumption that everything would work out somehow. But this time was different. "Jake, how did you even meet this Marcus guy?" "Through a friend of a friend. Look, I know it was stupid to borrow money from someone I barely knew. I know the whole cryptocurrency thing was too good to be true, but I thought I could make enough money to finally pay you back for everything. I thought I could turn things around." That confession hit me harder than I'd expected. For years, I'd assumed that Jake just took my money without thinking about it, that he saw me as an endless ATM rather than a person making sacrifices. The idea that he'd been trying to find a way to pay me back, even through such a reckless scheme, complicated my feelings about the whole situation. "Jake, you don't need to pay me back. That's not what this is about." "Isn't it? Because I keep track, Sarah. I know exactly how much money you've given me over the years. $17,000. And now with Mom's debt, you're out almost $30,000 because of this family." I hadn't realized he'd been keeping track. I hadn't realized he understood the full scope of what I'd sacrificed. "So you borrowed money from a dangerous person to try to pay me back?" "I borrowed money from Marcus because I thought I could double it and finally be the brother you deserved, instead of the screw-up who keeps asking for help." We were both quiet for a moment. I could hear traffic in the background on his end of the call, which meant he wasn't at Mom's house anymore. "Where are you right now, Jake?" "I'm at the Greyhound station downtown. I've got enough money for a bus ticket to Denver. I figured I could start over there, maybe find work in construction or something, stay out of Marcus's way until he gives up looking for me." The idea of Jake running away to Denver, of our family falling apart because of money, made me feel sick. But the alternative, selling my car and enabling his bad decisions once again, felt equally wrong. "Jake, running away isn't going to solve anything. Marcus knows Mom's address. He knows where you work. If he disappears, he's going to assume Mom knows where you went. Mom doesn't know where I'm going. I'm not telling anyone." "That's not going to matter to Marcus. If he can't find you, he's going to pressure the people who care about you to give him information." I could hear Jake breathing heavily on the other end of the call, and I realized he hadn't thought through the implications of running away. He was so focused on his own immediate safety that he hadn't considered how his disappearance might put Mom at risk. "What am I supposed to do then?" he asked. "I don't have $12,000. I can't get a loan from a bank. I've already asked everyone I know for money, and nobody has that kind of cash just lying around." "What about your boss at the coffee shop? What about getting a second job?" "Sarah, I make $11 an hour at the coffee shop. Even if I worked every single hour they give me, it would take me months to save up that kind of money. Marcus wants his money in 10 days. 10 days. The deadline was even shorter than I'd thought. Have you talked to Marcus about a payment plan?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "Marcus doesn't do payment plans. Marcus does full payment or consequences." I found myself actually considering it. Selling my car, taking the bus to work, starting over financially one more time. Because the alternative was Jake running away to Denver, Mom worrying herself sick, and our family falling apart over money and bad decisions. "Jake, if I did this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I sold my car and gave you the money, what would prevent this exact same situation from happening again next year?" "It won't happen again." "You've said that before." This time is different. You've said that before, too. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. I don't know how to promise you it won't happen again, Sarah. I don't know how to promise that I'll suddenly become the kind of person who makes good decisions and doesn't need help. All I can tell you is that I'm scared, and I'm sorry, and I wish I could go back and undo all the stupid things I've done. That honesty coming from Jake was so unexpected that it knocked down all my carefully constructed arguments about personal responsibility and natural consequences. This wasn't the cocky, charming Jake who always had an excuse ready. This was a scared 25-year-old who had finally run out of options. Jake, are you really in physical danger, or are you just scared about the money? Marcus showed up at my apartment 2 days ago. He didn't threaten me directly, but he made it very clear that he knows my schedule, my routines, where I work. He described my morning coffee order and the route I take to work. The message was pretty obvious. My blood went cold. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about Jake's safety, and possibly Mom's safety too. Why didn't you tell me this part earlier? Because I was hoping I could figure something else out. I've been trying to get a loan, trying to find someone else to borrow from, trying to come up with any solution that didn't involve asking you for more money. I looked around my apartment, at my secondhand furniture, my 10-year-old laptop, my carefully budgeted life, and I realized that all the principles and boundaries I'd been trying to establish didn't matter if Jake actually got hurt. Jake, don't get on that bus to Denver. What? Stay where you are. I'm going to figure something out. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you're my brother. And despite everything, I love you. But Jake? Yeah? This is the last time. Whatever I do to help you out of this mess, it's the absolute last time. After this, you're on your own. I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet apartment, staring at my car keys on the kitchen counter. In a few hours, I'd be posting my Honda Civic for sale online, giving up my independence and mobility to save my brother from the consequences of his own terrible decisions. But for the first time in years, I wasn't doing it just because Mom asked me to, or because I felt guilty, or because I was trying to prove what a good daughter and sister I was. I was doing it because I'd finally realized that sometimes loving someone means saving them from themselves, even when they don't deserve it. The first thing I did after hanging up with Jake was research. If I was going to sell my car to save my brother, I needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with. I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop looking up everything I could find about cryptocurrency scams, loan sharks in Portland, and what options someone might have when threatened by dangerous creditors. What I found wasn't reassuring. Stories of people who'd lost their savings accounts to fake investment schemes, families torn apart by debt to the wrong people, and cases where running away had only made things worse. But I also found information about resources I hadn't known existed: victim advocacy groups, legal aid organizations, even some law enforcement units that specialized in financial crimes.
By 4 p.m., I had a plan that went beyond just selling my car and hoping for the best. I called Jake back. I need you to meet me at Mom's house, I told him. And Jake, bring everything you have related to this Marcus situation. Every text message, every email, every piece of paper. We're going to handle this properly. When I arrived at Mom's house an hour later, both she and Jake were waiting in the living room. Mom looked like she'd been crying, and Jake looked like he hadn't slept in days. The contrast between them and the cheerful yellow walls of Mom's living room was jarring. Sarah, I can't believe you changed your mind, Mom said, standing up to hug me. I haven't changed my mind about anything yet, I said, gently extracting myself from her embrace. But I have been doing research, and there are some things we need to talk about before anyone makes any decisions. I sat down across from them and pulled out my phone where I'd taken notes during my afternoon of research. Jake, first question. Do you have any written documentation of your agreement with Marcus? Any texts, emails, anything that shows the terms of the loan? Jake looked confused by the question. It wasn't really a formal loan. We just talked and he gave me the money. So there's no contract, no written record of the interest rate or repayment terms? He said he wanted double the money back in a month. That was it. I made a note on my phone.
What about the cryptocurrency platform he told you to use? Do you have records of those transactions? The platform disappeared 3 days after I put the money in. The whole website just vanished. And Marcus knew about this platform. He recommended it specifically. Yeah, he said it was a sure thing, that he'd made tons of money using it himself. I looked up from my phone and saw that Mom was following the conversation with growing confusion. Sarah, what does any of this have to do with selling your car? She asked. It has everything to do with it, Mom, because what Jake is describing isn't just a loan gone bad, it's a criminal enterprise. Marcus didn't just lend Jake money for a bad investment, he set Jake up to be robbed. The room went quiet. Jake stared at me with his mouth slightly open, and Mom looked like she was trying to process what I'd just said. What do you mean, set up? Jake asked. Think about it. Marcus meets you through a friend of a friend, which means he's specifically targeting people in your social circle. He offers you money for an investment opportunity that he personally recommends. The investment platform disappears 3 days later with your money. And now Marcus wants not just his original money back, but double, with threats of violence if you don't pay. I pulled up one of the articles I had found on my phone and showed it to them. This is called an advance fee fraud or recovery room scam. The victim borrows money to invest in what they think is a legitimate opportunity. The scammer keeps both the borrowed money and the investment money, and then uses threats to extract even more money from the victim or their family. Jake's face went pale. You're saying Marcus planned this whole thing? I'm saying Marcus probably has no intention of going away even if we give him $12,000, because if we're willing to sell a car to save you from his threats, what else might we be willing to sell? What other family members might be willing to pay to keep you safe? Mom sank back into her chair like the air had gone out of her. So, giving him money won't actually solve the problem? It might solve it temporarily, or it might just prove that our family is a good target for future extortion. Jake stood up and started pacing around the living room, running his hands through his hair. So what am I supposed to do? If I don't pay him, he's going to hurt me. If I do pay him, he might just ask for more money later. And if I run away, he might go after Mom. Actually, there's a fourth option, I said. We will report this to the police. The police? Mom looked horrified. Sarah, you can't call the police on family business. This isn't family business anymore, Mom. This is criminal business. Jake is a victim of fraud, and Marcus is committing extortion. That's what the police are for.
Jake stopped pacing and turned to look at me. But what if the police can't do anything? What if Marcus finds out I reported him and gets even more angry? Jake, from what you've told me, Marcus is already planning to hurt you if you don't pay. Reporting him to the police can't make your situation much worse, but it might make it a lot better. I had researched this part too. I pulled up another page on my phone and read from it. Portland police have a financial crimes unit that specifically handles cases like this. They work with the FBI on interstate fraud cases, and they have experience with intimidation and threats related to financial scams. More importantly, once you file a report, Marcus's threats become a matter of official record. What does that mean? Mom asked. It means if anything happens to Jake, the police will know exactly who to look for. And it means if Marcus contacts any of us again, we can report it as harassment and violation of a restraining order. Jake sat back down, looking overwhelmed. I never thought about calling the police. I just assumed this was my problem to solve. It is your problem, Jake, but it's a problem that involves criminal activity, which means you don't have to solve it alone. Mom was quiet for a long moment, twisting her wedding ring again. What if the police don't believe Jake? What if they think he's just trying to get out of paying back money he legitimately owes? That's why we're going to document everything first. Jake, I need you to write down every interaction you've had with Marcus, every detail you can remember about how you met him, what he said about the investment opportunity, what happened when the platform disappeared. I need you to write down the exact threats he's made and when he made them. I pulled a legal pad out of my purse and handed it to Jake, along with a pen. Start with the first time you met Marcus and work forward chronologically. Include dates if you remember them, locations, other people who were present. The more detailed you can be, the better.
While Jake was writing, I turned to Mom. Mom, I need you to think about whether Marcus has made any attempts to contact you directly. Phone calls, visits, anything that might be related to Jake's situation. She shook her head. No, nothing like that. Good. That's important information too. For the next hour, Jake filled 3 pages with details about his interactions with Marcus. As he wrote, the full scope of the scam became clearer. Marcus had specifically targeted young men in Jake's social circle, all of whom had family members with steady jobs. The cryptocurrency platform had been sophisticated enough to fool several victims before disappearing, and Marcus's threats had been carefully crafted to sound intimidating without being specific enough to constitute obvious criminal behavior. Jake, this is really good documentation, I said, when he finished writing. This shows a clear pattern of fraud and intimidation. So we're really going to call the police? We're going to call the police, file a report, and ask about getting a restraining order against Marcus. But Jake, there's something else we need to talk about. Both Mom and Jake looked at me expectantly. I mean that Jake is 25 years old, and his first instinct when he got in trouble was to ask his mother to convince his sister to sell her car, not to find a second job, not to ask his friends for help, not to explore legal options or victim resources. His first instinct was to involve the women in his family in solving his problems. Jake looked down at the legal pad in his hands. Sarah, Let me finish. Mom, your first instinct was to come to my apartment and ask me to give up my transportation because Jake made a bad decision. Not to help Jake research his options, not to encourage him to take responsibility for the situation, but to ask me to sacrifice something important so Jake wouldn't have to face consequences. Mom's face was getting red. We're a family, Sarah. Families help each other. Yes, we are a family, but helping each other can't always mean that Jake makes mistakes and other people pay for them. That's not helping Jake, that's enabling him. I pulled out my phone and showed them something else I'd researched that afternoon. I spent some time looking up financial counseling services in Portland, places where Jake can learn to budget, manage debt, and make better financial decisions. I also found information about career counseling services that can help him figure out how to increase his income. Jake looked up from the legal pad. You want me to go to counseling? I want you to get the tools you need to handle your own financial problems. Because, Jake, this can't happen again. Our family can't keep operating like this. So you're not going to sell your car? Mom asked. I'm not going to sell my car to pay off Marcus, no. But I am going to help Jake report this to the police, and I'm going to help him access the resources he needs to avoid this kind of situation in the future. I looked at both of them, these people I loved who had been trapped in a destructive pattern for so long that they couldn't see how unhealthy it had become. The difference is that I'm going to help Jake solve this problem, not solve it for him. Jake nodded slowly. Okay, I think I understand the difference. Mom stood up from her chair and walked to the window, staring out at her garden. I don't like this plan, Sarah. I don't like involving the police in family business, and I don't like the idea of Jake having to handle this situation himself. Mom, Jake isn't handling it himself, he's just handling it like an adult with appropriate support and resources. She turned around to face us again. And what if the police can't help? What if Marcus doesn't care about restraining orders? What if Jake gets hurt because we didn't just pay the money? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But Mom, we can't make decisions based on fear of what might happen. We have to make decisions based on what's actually best for everyone involved. The room was quiet again, but it felt different this time. Less desperate, more thoughtful. So, what happens next? Jake asked. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost 6 p.m. Next, we call the Portland non-emergency line and ask about filing a report for fraud and intimidation. We document everything that's happened, and we ask about getting a restraining order against Marcus.
Tonight? Right now. The Portland police station downtown felt intimidating in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the bustling, chaotic police station you see in movies. It was quieter, more professional, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly pale. Jake kept fidgeting with the sleeves of his jacket, and I could tell he was having second thoughts about being there.
We'd called the non-emergency line the night before, and after explaining Jake's situation, they'd scheduled us to meet with Detective Maria Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Unit first thing Monday morning. I'd taken the day off work, something I rarely did unless I was actually sick, but this felt too important to squeeze into evenings and weekends. Detective Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with short dark hair and an expression that managed to be both serious and reassuring. She led us into a small conference room with white walls and a table that had seen better days. "Before we start," she said, pulling out a digital recorder, "I want you to know that what you're describing sounds like a pattern we've been tracking for several months. You're not the first person to come in with this type of situation." Jape looked up from his hands for the first time since we'd arrived. "Really?" "Really. We've had at least 6 similar reports since January, all involving cryptocurrency investment scams, all targeting young adults with family members who have stable incomes, all using the same intimidation tactics when the fake investments disappear." I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that we weren't dealing with an isolated incident, but anger that Marcus had been doing this to other families for months. "Have you been able to arrest anyone?" "We've made some progress, but these operations are often more complex than they appear on the surface. That's why documentation like what Jake has brought is so valuable." Detective Rodriguez opened the folder Jake had given her and spread out the pages he'd written the day before. "Jake, I'm going to ask you to walk me through everything again, but this time I want you to focus on details you might not have thought were important. Names of other people who were present when you met Marcus, descriptions of locations, any unusual behavior you noticed." For the next hour, Jake recounted his story while Detective Rodriguez took notes and asked follow-up questions. She was particularly interested in the bar where Jake had first met Marcus and in the friend who had introduced them. "This friend, Tommy Chen, how well do you know him?" "Pretty well. We went to high school together and we've stayed in touch. He's the one who told me about the investment opportunity." "Has Tommy invested with Marcus too?" Jake paused, thinking. "You know, I'm not sure. He talked about how much money he'd made, but when I asked to see his account balance, he said he'd already withdrawn his profits." Detective Rodriguez made another note. "We're going to need to talk to Tommy as well. It's possible he's another victim, or it's possible he's working with Marcus to identify potential targets." The idea that Tommy might be involved in the scam visibly shook Jake. Tommy had been one of his closest friends since high school, and the possibility that he'd been deliberately set up by someone he trusted was clearly devastating. "Jake, I know this is hard to hear," Detective Rodriguez said gently. "But in these types of operations, the scammers often recruit people who are already in their social circles. Sometimes those people don't realize they're being used as recruiters. Sometimes they do." "How can we find out which one Tommy is?" "We'll investigate. But for now, I need you to not contact Tommy about any of this. Don't tell him you filed a police report. Don't ask him questions about Marcus. Don't mention our conversation today. Can you do that?" Jake nodded, though he looked miserable about it. "What about Marcus? What happens with him?" "That depends on what our investigation turns up. Based on what Jake has told me, Marcus has committed multiple felonies, fraud, extortion, and probably money laundering. But building a case takes time, especially if he's operating across state lines or using sophisticated financial instruments." "How much time?" "Could be weeks, could be months. In the meantime, we're going to work on getting Jake a restraining order, and we're going to put some protective measures in place." She explained that the restraining order would legally prohibit Marcus from contacting Jake, coming to his workplace, or visiting his apartment. If Marcus violated the order, he could be arrested immediately, regardless of whether the broader investigation was complete. "But Detective," Jake said, "Marcus gave me a deadline. He wants his money in 9 days. What happens if he doesn't know about the restraining order?" "Oh, he'll know about it. We're going to serve it to him personally, which means an officer will find him and hand him the legal documents. That's going to send a pretty clear message that law enforcement is now involved in this situation." The relief on Jake's face was visible, but I could see he was still worried about something. What if serving the restraining order makes him angry? What if he decides to retaliate? Detective Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "Jake, I'm going to be honest with you.
There is some risk in involving law enforcement. Marcus might escalate his behavior in the short term, but the alternative, paying him and hoping he goes away, has its own risks. Based on our experience with similar cases, paying Marcus would likely just confirm that your family is a good target for future extortion. She opened another folder and pulled out a case file. Last year, we had a family that paid off a scammer in a situation very similar to yours. 3 months later, the same scammer contacted them again with a new scheme, and when they refused to participate, he threatened to hurt their teenage daughter unless they paid him $5,000. The extortion continued for 6 months until they finally came to us. The room was quiet for a moment while we absorbed that information. So, what you're saying is that once we pay, we're basically trapped. That's exactly what I'm saying. These scammers don't usually stop at one payment. They keep coming back until their victims either run out of money or find the courage to involve law enforcement. Jake rubbed his face with both hands. I can't believe I got our family into this mess. Jake, you're a victim here, Detective Rodriguez said firmly. What happened to you was a crime, not a mistake. The people who are responsible for this mess are Marcus and whoever else is working with him. She stood up and gathered her papers. Here's what happens next. I'm going to file an incident report and start the process for getting you a restraining order. That should be in place by Wednesday. In the meantime, I want you to avoid going places alone, especially anywhere Marcus might expect to find you. What about work?
Talk to your manager about the situation. Most employers are understanding about employee safety issues, and they may be able to adjust your schedule or have someone walk you to your car. We spent another 30 minutes going over safety protocols and discussing what Jake should do if Marcus contacted him before the restraining order was in place. Detective Rodriguez gave us her direct phone number and emphasized that we should call immediately if anything unusual happened. When we finally left the police station, I felt emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. For the first time since this whole situation started, we had a plan that didn't involve me sacrificing my financial stability to solve Jake's problems. I can't believe we just did that, Jake said as we walked to my car. How do you feel about it? Scared, but also relieved. Like, maybe this isn't as hopeless as I thought it was. We drove to a nearby coffee shop to decompress and plan our next steps. Jake ordered a sandwich and actually ate it, which was the first time I'd seen him eat a full meal since this crisis started. Sarah, I want to ask you something, he said between bites. What's that? Why did you decide to help me this way instead of just selling your car? It would have been easier to just give Marcus the money. I thought about his question while stirring sugar into my coffee. Because giving Marcus the money wouldn't have actually helped you, Jake. It would have helped Marcus, and it might have made me feel like a good sister temporarily, but it wouldn't have solved your underlying problem. What underlying problem? The problem is that you're 25 years old, and you still think that other people are responsible for fixing your mistakes. Jake put down his sandwich and looked at me. That's harsh. Maybe, but it's also true. Jake, when you got involved with Marcus, your first thought wasn't, how do I get myself out of this? Your first thought was, who can I get to pay for this? That's not healthy for you, and it's not sustainable for our family. So, you think I deserved to get threatened by Marcus? Of course not. Nobody deserves to be threatened or extorted. But I think you needed to learn how to handle your own problems like an adult, and this situation gave us an opportunity to do that. Jake was quiet for a few minutes, picking at his sandwich. You know what the weird part is? He finally said. What? Talking to Detective Rodriguez made me feel more capable than I felt in years. Like I actually had some power in this situation instead of just being a victim waiting for someone else to save me. That comment surprised me. I'd been so focused on the practical aspects of involving law enforcement that I hadn't considered how it might affect Jake's sense of agency. What do you mean? I mean that for the past week, I've felt completely helpless. Marcus had all the power, and all I could do was beg family members for money and hope somebody would bail me out. But today, sitting in that police station, I felt like I was actually doing something to solve my own problem. You were solving your own problem.
With support, but you were the one making the decisions and taking the actions. Yeah, exactly. And that feels way better than just waiting for you to sell your car and hoping Marcus would go away. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching other customers come and go. The coffee shop was busy with the usual Monday afternoon crowd: students studying for exams, business people having meetings, parents with strollers trying to caffeinate themselves through another day. Sarah, can I ask you something now? Sure. What are you going to do differently going forward? I mean, assuming we get through this Marcus situation okay, how are you going to make sure something like this doesn't happen again? Jake thought about it for a long time before answering. I think I need to get a real job, not just the coffee shop thing, but something that actually pays enough for me to support myself. What kind of job? I don't know yet. Detective Rodriguez gave me some information about career counseling services. Maybe I should start there and figure out what I'm actually good at besides getting myself into trouble. That sounds like a good plan. And I think I need to pay you back. Not all at once, obviously, but I want to start making payments on that $17,000 you've given me over the years. I was about to tell him that wasn't necessary, but I stopped myself. Maybe it was necessary. Not because I needed the money, but because Jake needed to take responsibility for the consequences of his past decisions. We can work out a payment plan that makes sense with your budget, I said instead. Really? You'd let me pay you back? Jake, I'd love for you to pay me back. Not because I'm desperate for the money, but because I think it would be good for you to follow through on your commitments. His face lit up with something I hadn't seen in years: genuine excitement about taking responsibility for something. Actually, that gives me an idea. What if I got a second job specifically to pay you back? Like, all the money from my second job goes to you until I've paid off the whole $17,000. How long would that take? If I could make an extra $1,000 a month, about a year and a half. That seems doable. For the first time in our conversation, Jake sounded genuinely enthusiastic about something related to work and money. It was such a dramatic change from his usual attitude towards financial responsibility that I almost didn't believe it was real. Jake, you don't have to pay me back just to prove something. I'm not doing it to prove something to you. I'm doing it to prove something to myself. We finished our coffee and walked back to my car. As I was driving Jake back to Mom's house, my phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez.
Sarah, I have some news about Marcus that I think you and Jake should know. Good news or bad news? Mostly good news. We've been tracking Marcus for longer than I initially told you. He's actually wanted on similar charges in 3 other states, and we've been working with federal authorities to build a case against him. What does that mean for Jake's situation? It means we're going to arrest Marcus this week, probably before his deadline with Jake. Once he's in custody, the immediate threat to your brother should be over. I pulled over to the side of the road and put the phone on speaker so Jake could hear. Detective, this is Jake. Are you saying I don't need to worry about Marcus anymore? I'm saying the situation's going to be resolved much faster than we usually see with these types of cases. Marcus has been operating under false identities and moving money across state lines, which makes this a federal case. The FBI has been building evidence against him for months, and your report gave us the last pieces we needed to move forward with an arrest. Jake leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. I can't believe this is almost over. There will still be legal proceedings, and you may need to testify in court eventually, but the immediate danger should be over by the end of this week. After we hung up with Detective Rodriguez, Jake and I sat in my parked car for a few minutes, both of us trying to process how quickly the situation had changed. I guess we don't need to worry about the restraining order anymore, Jake said. We'll still get it, just in case. But yeah, it looks like involving the police was definitely the right choice. Sarah? Yeah? Thank you for not just selling your car. Thank you for helping me figure out how to actually solve this problem. You're welcome, Jake. But you're the one who solved it. You're the one who filed the police report and provided the information they needed. We solved it together. Yeah, I said, starting the car again. We did.
3 days later, I was in the middle of debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rodriguez. Marcus arrested this morning. Federal charges. Your brother is safe. I stared at the message for a full minute before reality sunk in. It was over. The immediate crisis that had consumed our family for the past week was actually over. Not because we'd paid off a criminal, but because we'd done the right thing and trusted the system to work. I called Jake immediately. Did you see the text from Detective Rodriguez? I'm literally staring at it right now. I keep reading it over and over to make sure it's real. How do you feel? Like I can breathe again. Like I can actually go back to my apartment and sleep in my own bed tonight without worrying about Marcus showing up. Are you going to call Mom and tell her? There was a pause on Jake's end. Actually, I was hoping we could tell her together. Maybe go over there for dinner tonight and share the news in person. That sounds perfect. When we arrived at Mom's house that evening, she was in the kitchen making her famous pot roast, something she only did when she was either celebrating or extremely stressed. Based on the way she'd been wringing her hands since our police station visit, I suspected it was the latter. Mom, we have some news, Jake said as soon as we walked in. She immediately turned off the stove and gave us her full attention, her face tense with anxiety. What kind of news? The good kind, I said quickly. Marcus was arrested this morning. The FBI took him into custody on federal fraud charges. Mom's knees actually buckled, and she had to grab the counter to steady herself. Are you serious? He's really arrested? Really arrested, Jake confirmed. He's facing charges in 4 different states. He's not going to be bothering anyone for a very long time. Mom started crying then, but they were tears of relief rather than fear. She pulled both Jake and I into a hug that lasted longer than any hug we'd shared since we were children. I was so scared, she whispered. I've been barely sleeping, jumping every time the phone rang, worried that something terrible was going to happen to Jake. I know, Mom, but it's over now. We spent dinner talking about the details of Marcus's arrest and what it meant for Jake's case. Detective Rodriguez had explained that Jake would likely need to testify in the federal trial, but that his cooperation had been instrumental in building the case against Marcus and several other people involved in the fraud ring. I'm proud of you for going to the police, Mom said to Jake as we were clearing the dinner dishes. I was scared about involving law enforcement, but you were right to do it. Actually, it was Sarah's idea, Jake said. I wanted to run away to Denver. It was all of us working together, I corrected. Jake was brave enough to file the report, you were supportive enough to help us through it, and I did the research. We solved it as a family. Speaking of solving things as a family, there's something else I want to talk to both of you about. Mom and I looked at him expectantly. I've been thinking a lot about what Sarah said about me needing to take responsibility for my own problems, and I realized that just avoiding future problems isn't enough. I need to make things right for the problems I've already created. What do you mean? Mom asked. I mean, I want to pay Sarah back for all the money she's given me over the years. All $17,000. Mom looked surprised. Jake, that's a lot of money. I know it's a lot of money. That's exactly why I need to pay it back. Sarah has been sacrificing for years to bail me out of my mistakes, and it's time for me to act like the man she deserves to have as a brother. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but they were good tears this time. Jake, you don't have to.
Yes, I do. Not because you're demanding it, but because I need to prove to myself that I can follow through on my commitments. I've already talked to my manager at the coffee shop about picking up extra shifts, and I'm going to start looking for a second job. What kind of second job? Mom asked. Jake pulled out his phone and showed us a website he'd bookmarked. I've been researching food delivery services. I can do that in the evenings and on weekends, and all the money from those jobs will go directly to paying Sarah back. How long will that take? I asked. If I can make an extra $800 to $1,000 a month, about 18 months. Maybe less if I can find additional work during busy seasons. Mom was looking back and forth between Jake and me like she was watching a tennis match. Jake, are you sure about this? That's going to be a lot of extra work. I'm sure. Actually, I'm excited about it. For the first time in my adult life, I'm going to have a plan for my money instead of just spending whatever I have and hoping someone else will solve my problems when I run out. After dinner, Jake left to go back to his apartment for the first time in a week, and Mom and I stayed behind to finish cleaning up the kitchen. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Mom said as she was drying the last of the dishes. "Of course." "Are you disappointed in me for asking you to sell your car?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on Jake's transformation and the resolution of the Marcus situation that I hadn't really processed my feelings about Mom's role in everything that had happened. "I'm not disappointed in you, Mom, but I am concerned about the pattern we've all fallen into as a family." "What pattern?" "The pattern where Jake makes a mistake, you panic about it, and then both of you look to me to fix it with money. That's not healthy for any of us." Mom was quiet for a moment, folding and refolding the dish towel in her hands. "I never thought about it that way. I just saw my children in trouble and I wanted to help." "I know you did, and wanting to help your children is natural and beautiful, but there's a difference between helping and enabling." "What's the difference?" "Helping Jake would have been supporting him while he figured out how to solve his own problem. Enabling him was asking me to solve his problem for him." Mom nodded slowly. "I think I understand. When I asked you to sell your car, I wasn't really helping Jake learn how to handle difficult situations. I was just teaching him that someone else would always be there to fix his mistakes." "Exactly. And that's not fair to Jake because it doesn't help him grow up. And it's not fair to me because it puts me in a position where I have to choose between helping my family and taking care of myself." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't realize I was putting you in that position." "You don't need to apologize, Mom. We all learned something from the situation. The important thing is that we handle things differently going forward." "How do we do that?" I thought about her question while putting away the last of the clean dishes. "I think we start by talking to each other more honestly about money and problems. No more of Jake getting into trouble and you finding out about it secondhand. No more of you calling me in crisis mode without exploring other options first. And no more of me just writing checks to make problems go away without addressing the underlying issues." That sounds reasonable. But Sarah, what if Jake gets into trouble again? What if there's a real emergency? "If there's a real emergency, we'll handle it like we handled this one. We'll work together to find solutions that don't involve one person sacrificing everything for everyone else." Mom smiled for the first time since this whole crisis started. "I like that plan." 6 months later, Jake had paid me back $3,000 and was ahead of schedule on his payment plan. He'd gotten promoted to shift supervisor at the coffee shop, picked up a steady delivery job 3 nights a week, and had started taking online courses in business management. More importantly, he'd stopped asking family members for money. When his car needed repairs, he saved up for them. When he wanted to take a weekend trip with friends, he budgeted for it. When he decided he wanted to move to a better apartment, he waited until he could afford the security deposit and higher rent. The change in Jake wasn't just about money, it was about his entire approach to life. He'd gone from being someone who reacted to problems by looking for external solutions to someone who proactively planned to avoid problems in the first place. Mom had changed too. She'd started asking Jake more questions about his finances and his plans, not because she wanted to control his decisions, but because she wanted to understand his life better. And when he did face challenges, her first response was to ask him what he thought he should do, rather than immediately calling me to fix things. As for me, I'd finally been able to buy that house I'd been saving for. Not the specific one I'd looked at months earlier, that one had sold while I was dealing with the Marcus crisis, but a different one that was even better. A small craftsman bungalow with a garden and a detached garage that I'd converted into a home office. The down payment had come from the money Jake had paid me back, plus some additional savings I'd been able to accumulate once I wasn't constantly preparing for his next financial emergency. For the first time in my adult life, I was living in a space that reflected my own choices and priorities, rather than just being functional and cheap. But the biggest change was in how our family communicated. We'd started having monthly dinners where we actually talked about our lives, our goals, and our challenges.
Not crisis-driven conversations, but regular check-ins where we could support each other in healthy ways. At one of those dinners, about 8 months after the Marcus situation, Jake brought up something that surprised both Mom and me. "I've been thinking about going back to school," he said over Mom's lasagna. "What kind of school?" I asked. "Community college to start, maybe get an associate's degree in business or accounting, something that would help me move up from shift supervisor to management." "That sounds like a great idea," Mom said. "How would you pay for it?" "I've been researching financial aid, and I think I can get grants to cover most of the tuition. I'd have to take fewer delivery shifts, which means it would take longer to pay Sarah back, but I think the long-term benefits would be worth it." I looked at Jake across the dinner table, this person who had transformed from someone who made impulsive decisions based on get-rich-quick schemes to someone who was carefully researching educational investments and considering long-term financial implications.
Jake, I think going back to school is an excellent idea. And don't worry about the payment timeline. The important thing is that you keep moving forward. Actually, Jake said, I was hoping you might help me with something related to school. I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, wondering if we were falling back into old patterns. What kind of help? I was wondering if you'd be willing to look over my financial aid applications before I submit them. You're good with paperwork and forms, and I want to make sure I'm not missing anything that could affect my eligibility. I smiled, realizing that Jake was asking for support, not a bailout. He was asking me to use my skills to help him achieve his goals, not to solve his problems for him. I'd be happy to help you with your applications. Thanks. And Sarah, yeah, I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. Thank you for not selling your car. Thank you for helping me learn how to solve my own problems. This past year has been the first time in my adult life that I've felt genuinely proud of myself. And that wouldn't have happened if you just bailed me out like you always had before. Mom reached across the table and squeezed both of our hands. I'm proud of both of you, she said. I'm proud of Jake for growing up and taking responsibility for his life. And I'm proud of Sarah for having the courage to change how our family handles problems, even when it would have been easier to just keep doing things the old way. As I drove home that night to my own house, my own space, my own life that I'd finally been able to build, I thought about the choice I'd made that Saturday morning when Mama knocked on my apartment door asking me to sell my car. At the time, it had felt like choosing between helping my family and taking care of myself. But what I'd learned was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their bad decisions. Sometimes helping someone means forcing them to find their own strength, rather than providing them with an easy way out. The $12,000 I'd paid to clear Mom's credit card debt was money well spent. It had solved a real problem for someone I loved, and it had freed her from a cycle of compound interest and financial stress. But the $12,000 I hadn't spent to pay off Marcus wouldn't have been money wasted, not because Marcus didn't deserve to be paid, but because paying him wouldn't have solved the real problem. The real problem was that Jake needed to learn how to handle his own challenges, and our family needed to learn how to support each other without enabling destructive behavior. A year later, Jake finished his first semester of community college with a 3.8 GPA and a plan to transfer to a 4-year university to study business management. He'd paid me back $8,000 of the $17,000 he owed me, and more importantly, he'd learned to budget, save, and make financial decisions based on long-term goals rather than short-term impulses. Mom had started volunteering with a financial literacy program for seniors, helping other people avoid the credit card debt trap she'd fallen into. She'd also started dating someone, a retired teacher named Robert, who appreciated her gardening skills and her tendency to worry about everyone except herself. And me? I'd finally learned the difference between being responsible for my family and being responsible to my family. I learned that love doesn't always mean saying yes, and that sometimes the most caring thing you can do is trust someone enough to let them figure out their own solutions. The Honda Civic that I'd
almost sold to save Jake from his own poor decisions, was still parked in my driveway, reliable as ever. But now it wasn't just my transportation. It was a symbol of the choice to support my family without sacrificing myself, and the decision to help the people I love become stronger rather than simply rescuing them from the consequences of their own actions. Sometimes the most important word in any family is no. And sometimes that no is what finally allows everyone to say yes to becoming the people they're actually capable of being.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.